Hello and welcome to the next musical Jewel Box from the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. This week we're doing our Composers Forum, where our composer and music director, Dirk Brossé, is talking with this season's composer in residence, Nathan Bales. We're going to listen to one of Bales' pieces and discuss its merits, tell him why we think it's a terrible piece. No, we would never do that, just joking. And go into a little bit about what contemporary composition means, how it relates to history, the things composers have in common throughout centuries, and what we see coming for the future. Maestro, why don't you start us off? We know you as a conductor. How long have you been composing, and how do you see yourself as a composer, to give a background to some of our chats?
Well, I started composing at the age of 13, 14, 15, writing very simple things on the piano, simple melodies and simple piano pieces. But seriously, I started at the age of 18, 19, 20, 21. I studied at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Ghent and in Brussels, basically. And the pedagogic system in those days was that first you had to study profoundly harmony and counterpoint and fugue before you could go on or you could start composition. But then I studied with a contemporary composer whose name is Lucien Goethals, who was into electronic music. He was a very close friend to Belgian composer Henri Pousseur. Probably you heard about Henri Pousseur, but also he was very active in Darmstadt. And he was also very close friends with Stockhausen. So that was really, really, really modern. For my ears, at least, in those days, I was like 18, 19 years old. So this was my first composition professor. Then the second composition professor was actually my teacher of counterpoint and fugue, who was teaching at the Brussels Conservatory. And I took a couple of lessons with him. It didn't turn out very, very well. And then I decided to quit having lessons with a composer in a school and to just do my own thing. I always was very close connected to a couple of composers in different styles, various styles. One of them, unfortunately, just passed away at the age of 91. He was really a major composer in Europe. His name is Frédéric de Vreese, and he wrote both classical music and a lot of music for symphony orchestras, a lot of concertos. Some of his concertos had been played at the Queen Elizabeth competition, his violin concerto, his piano concertos, but he also did film music. So he combined traditional, modern, Western classical music with more commercial music. And this is actually the story of my life. So, Nathan, what about you?
No, so for me, the way I got started composing is it's kind of a funny story. It was very disingenuous, actually. It was from a very I was in high school. It was my freshman year. I had entered band camp after quitting the football team because I thought the kids on the football team were mean. So I left, and that was a whole other scandal. But I was a very nervous kid, and I didn't really know, wasn't great at socially interacting. And there was a person that I had a crush on, and they said they liked Hans Zimmer. And so in a nervous state, I yelled out, "I want to be a film composer." And then we dated for 6 months, so I had to keep that up. Um, and while that happened, I kind of I kind of got in this like head state of being like, you're going to keep this up. And I believed it, even though I made it up on the spot. So like I'd go home to my dad and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a film composer now. And my dad's a musician. So my dad lost his mind. He was so excited because I've been doing music my whole life, but I sort of hated doing it for a lot of it because I was always my dad's shadow for a lot of things. And I didn't really want to have to be the jazz trumpet prodigy at the jazz camp. And then there was an experience I had at the Spoleto Festival of 2012 at the English premiere of Philip Glass's Kepler. Um, and I didn't know anything about Philip Glass. I didn't know anything about opera really, except for that I was 13 and I thought it was dumb. I felt bad when I was that age. I completely ignored the fact that I was so reluctant to go, because the moment the overture started, I was pushed to the front of my seat. And it was mostly because like I had never heard any music that had ever sounded like that before in my life. Like it was something I'd never heard before, couldn't have even possibly imagined that sound could have ever been in any place. But the coolest part about it was sitting 4 seats down from me was Philip Glass. He just happened to be sitting at that place. And I ran up to him because I didn't know anything about the time. And I was like, dude, that was so cool. And he was really nice to me. He talked to me for like 5 or 7 minutes with like a line of other people who were probably much more important than the 13-year-old who called him dude. Um, but yeah, and then after that, I've just been on the composition path. I haven't ever really looked any other direction, looked at back at all. It's just been that experience of what I felt in the opera, where I sat there and like just there was a moment where I was like so completely taken in, so completely excited, enthralled, and happy to be existing in that one moment. That's all I want to be able to give other people. Like just to be able to write music that when they hear it, they might be a 13-year-old kid that thinks this is stupid, I don't want to be here. And then against their will, they are going to be on the edge of their seat, excited that they are able to be in this place for a moment in time. And that's just really what pulled me into music.
Shouting at Philip Glass. I guess that's a good way to get started for a good way to get started for anybody. Well, then, if we've got, so now we know our composers, we know what they think, and let's get into what you sound like. So we're going to take a little bit of an excursion into a couple minutes of one of Nathan's pieces. And rather than introduce it, why don't we just listen to it? And then, Nathan, you can give us a little bit of brief background information about what inspired it. And then we can talk a little bit about what makes it contemporary. All right. And I think we can dive right in here. So Nathan, tell us. You told me that there's a little bit of a Walt Whitman inspiration in this.
Yeah, it's so it's a tone poem based off of a poem from Leaves of Grass, which is the poem is Song of the Open Road. And it's just one of my favorite. Well, I love Walt Whitman in general. Walt Whitman's one of my favorite poets of all time, and I really like this poem. It has one really great two-line thing from part of it, which is uh, I ask not for good fortune, for I myself am good fortune. Um, and so I don't know. I like that. For me, Whitman always inspires a sense of a broadened freedom and joy for existing in the 24 hours of the day. And I just kind of wanted to write a piece that reveled in the idea of joy and the existence of the 24 hours of the day.
Great. So Maestro Dirk, what are your reactions to our composer in residence's tone poem?
I really love it. I like it. If you would ask me what you think about it, is for me it sounds Asian. It sounds it's maybe because of the sometimes the pentatonic scale I hear in there. Then also the bird songs, the inner conversations, the inner dialogue between the woodwinds. I was just wondering if everything was written out, or if there were some aleatoric passages where people were reacting to each other. Actually, that's a question. That's a question for you. Is everything precisely written out, or are there some aleatoric passages?
Yeah, it's almost entirely aleatoric. And I will note there actually is a lot of uh, Asian influence, because the violin part, while it is written like this is like, I feel like the little weird dissonance to it, which is the violin part is written like a sort of Irish Americana English folk song,
Yeah,
but I really love the Butterfly Violin Concerto.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I know this work very well. Yeah,
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 and so a lot of the violin part is actually a little bit nitpicky written with the violinist I was working
yeah,
with at the time. So
yeah,
that way they're using a lot of the techniques of playing things on one string
yeah.
to imitate the oh God, I cannot remember the name of
Ergo,
that
ergo, ergo.
erhu, yeah, to imitate the erhu, and some of the ways that there are a lot of like little really specific different things.
Yeah,
There are a lot of these glisses they
yeah,
do. So it's supposed to sort of be, there is a little bit of that timbre throughout it.
yeah. But talking about the aleatoric way of writing, how precise did you write it in the aleatoric gesture? So are there because sometimes at some points I could hear that it was at some point I was using my fantasy. It was like a, a sound cloud coming from somewhere. It was very very nearby, and then it went away. But there was a I. It's my first listening, of course, but I heard a certain structure. So I heard at some points that something changed. Harmonies, melodic lines, instrumentation. So were these the points where you had a different aleatoric passage?
Uh, yeah, so basically what I did is I wrote out short snippets of bird calls.
Yeah,
And so each line, or let's say it's just the clarinet part, right at the very first big, like that gong hit right at the opening, they have a big box that spans like 4 measures. And it has 5 different bird calls in it, all separated by a comma. And
yeah,
then that's all got a big the repeat around it, and a giant arrow that goes through the next coming measures. And what they're supposed to do there is they just alternate between the different uh, bird calls, and I indicate how much space the comma is worth. And it's a circuit duration. It's not fully a second, not fully 2 seconds, not fully, but it's around that time period. And then what I do throughout it is I had like another little line or so that would show for how long, or like basically to shorten the amount of duration between the two gestures or to increase, so they'd have more time between their distinct
Yeah.
bird calls or less time. And
Yeah.
then I think there's 3 or 4 places where I changed the bird calls, so that way they're doing either louder ones or smaller ones or more of them. The
Yeah.
flute one in particular, I loved adding more and more notes for them to double tongue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Since we're getting into this idea of how our music, there's something written on the page, and then there's something that actually happens in the hall. And I think this is actually a nice segue to move into our next topic here, which is entirely about style. And this is especially inspired by actually something Nathan and I were talking about before, about realizing that a composer's voice is really something that's very distinct to them, even when they express themselves through different styles. And the best example we had for this is Stravinsky. You know, Stravinsky has 3 very defined periods in his life. He's got the Rite of Spring Petrushka period. He's got his neoclassical violin concerto,
Pinella, yeah,
the Pocinella, and then he goes into his Requiem serial period. And completely different toppings. If you're thinking of it as like food, I mean, he's throwing guac on one, he's throwing chocolate syrup on another, totally different worlds. And yet there's always this Stravinsky quality that's constantly coming through. So how do you find this happening in your own life is the question I'd like to direct us to here, especially when we have the world making different questions for us, different demands from different ensembles, whether or not we're working more commercially, whether we're working academically, and how do you both personally navigate the questions of your own style? Do you think about it a lot? Do you control it a lot? Or do you just kind of let it flow and see what happens when you look back on it 10 years later?
Well, it's a difficult question. Yeah, it depends on how long you are in the world of music. I think if you start as a composer, you're trying different things, and you experiment. You got to learn new things, and then at some point you find your own way. In my particular history as a composer, I started with that particular professor, Lucien Goethals, who was a student from Stockhausen and a colleague from Stockhausen. So his music was very much influenced by Darmstadt and by what happened in Europe in the after the Second World War period. So in the 60s and the 70s, and everything had to be atonal, everything had to be experimental, and everything had to be new and modern, whatever that means. I don't know what modern music is. I don't know what contemporary music is. Contemporary music for me is music that is written today, but it has no other definition than that. So when I studied with this person, I was very, very productive. I wrote, I was experimenting with a pre-electronic music. I was writing atonal music, Darmstadt music, whatever. And at some day, I went to my professor and I said, "Listen, you made me write tons of music, but this is a lie. This is a lie. This is not me. I'm very glad I could do it. I learned a lot. I learned especially a lot what I should not do for the rest of my life." And literally, I burned all this music. I burned the whole pile of pieces I had written, because for me, in my opinion, it was a lie. And then I started to try to detect my own style and my own musical language in which I could express myself. And then I rediscovered, luckily, I rediscovered tonal music, but in a very broad spectrum, in 360 degrees. But tonal music, music that had a certain harmony within itself. And then I discovered something, and which I'm still influenced by. It's the world of the ethnic music. Ethnic music, all types of ethnic music. I studied a lot of ethnic music, and music from India, from the Aboriginals, but also jazz. Jazz is not ethnic, but then if you compare it to classical music, it's not classical. So in a certain way, it is ethnic. I also discovered a lot of forgotten instruments, very old instruments, instruments that are not used anymore, instruments that live in museums, that are hanging on a wall, but sometimes that produce forgotten sounds. And over the years, I collected over thousands ethnic instruments, of which the sound is completely forgotten. And then I did an experiment that I wrote a symphony. It's called Artesia, in which I used a classical symphony orchestra, modern computers, computer-generated music, and ethnic instruments, 65 different ethnic instruments. And it was amazing. So you could hear the classical instruments, and all of a sudden you heard like flutes that were not really in tune. They sounded a bit weird, because they were made in a different tonal system that didn't connect with the Western classical tuning system. And it was an amazing experience, and people really loved it. And then I made a second symphony that is called the Birth of Music, and there I really went very far away from classical music. And since 30 years, I'm working on a opus magnum, and I think I have all the little pieces of the puzzle in my head. I just need to find the time to put it on paper and to produce the piece, in which I want to combine the instruments we know, the ethnic instruments, but also the instruments that are generated by a computer that is driven by artificial intelligence. So you give to this computer, in the form of a robot, you give one sound or a melody or a rhythm, and then it's not a person, but I mean it's a computer that is reacting to it. So this is my own world that I created over the past 40 years. But besides that, I'm also working as a commercial composer. I love to write film music. I wrote 14 musicals. I love musical. I love theater. I love to write genre pieces. So during the COVID period, I wrote my second clarinet concerto that was inspired on a 15th century painting by Van Eyck. It's called The Mystic Lamp. And this painting really inspired me. So I wrote a clarinet concerto. That was a commission. But then just out of the blue, I wrote 21 concert waltzes for piano solo. And yeah, so my whole work is a combination of commissions in serious music, commissions in commercial music, which I also consider as serious, and then my own projects. And when you listen to these three genres, you always hear that there is the same musical autograph, whether it is a song or a tango or an experimental piece. There is also that musical autograph, and you cannot escape from it. It's something very weird. After a career of 40 years, when I try to do something else, something different, it doesn't work, because it's like I always go in a big city. I go to different restaurants and I try new things, but at the end, I always go to the same place, because you know what you get, you feel very comfortable. And the same thing with the music. I can express myself with the language I developed, with the construction of the sentences, with the vocabulary. I express myself in one language that everybody can understand. And sometimes there are some strange words from languages from Africa, from China, from wherever, that I use in the language that everybody understands. And even if there is a word or a phrase or even a chapter that people don't understand, it's always in the context of my own breath, my own musical soul. Does it make sense?
It does. Of course, as soon as you started saying, the restaurants we like to go to, all I thought of was, going to Monk's.
Yeah,
So it always comes back to the things you love, I guess.
exactly, exactly. And when we go to Monks, you have a list with 500 beers, and we end up always drinking the same thing.
It's always the same
Yeah,
because why reinvent the wheel? So
yeah.
now, Nathan, you've had a good educational background here, and you've gone to a couple different schools, but you're currently with us through the Curtis Institute, and I I wonder if if you'll have a similar but different perspective on the way the world demands things of you because you're in an environment where you don't have this financial reason to feel like you need to change who you are because you're specifically in a conservatory to grow.
So for me, this is all just like, this is just a lot of fun. And it's something where, I don't know, one of the main reasons I went into music was, uh, among the many different things that I had tried to do with my life, it was one of the first opportunities where I felt like everything that I did within the environment was positive as long as I was there to be having fun. Like everybody else benefited in from like this positive, optimistic environment of creation. And so for me, style is important. It is important to a certain extent, but for me, it's usually a lot more exciting when I'm the most excited when I get to write in a style that I've never been able to write in before due to certain limitations. Like if I got on a project, or like recently, Curtis, who is phenomenal about letting me explore as much as I want, helped me receive a program called Max, MSP, which is a computer program that helps you sort of create these patches, which are sort of like instruments almost, like they can do certain things. The range of what it can do is enormous. They helped me get Ableton so I can work on production and do other things. But I fell in love with the orchestra, so I love writing orchestra music. But the thing is, I would be heartbroken if I was told I could only write uh, orchestra music that was in the vein of a lot of modern music today. But I'd also be heartbroken if you told me that I could only write music that was in the vein of the romantic tradition, because I love both so much and I want to do both. I want to write giant Tchaikovsky sweeping melodies, and I also want to write giant crunchy stuff and different crazy rhythms and things. So for me, style is just sort of like, it's less of a question that I feel is important to me and more of a question that's important for me asking, well, what do you want? Because I'm up for anything.
Right. So you feel yourself as being rather polystylistic, which I think is not terribly uncommon with composers now. Though historically speaking, it's something that we actually have a bit of a privilege with. I mean, considering it from Mozart's point of view, I mean, he could play around with style a little bit, but it was much more, this is the way music sounds, and this is the way we'll do it. As opposed to the 20th century and the way media has exploded, we're allowed to just kind of grab what we want from the centuries before and from our heroes and our inspiration. So I actually reminds me of another idea. Do you have composers that, this is a question for both of you, do you have composers that you really admire that you wish you could sound like? And have you attempted it and failed? Or do you have composers that you never thought you'd like, but discovered, oh my God, I sound just like them, which is something that happened to me when I thought that I didn't like Copland. And then I looked back on 5 years of the pieces I wrote and said, oh my God, I'm just writing American music like Copland. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be cool. But these things crop up in our music in unexpected ways. So distilling my question, what are some unexpected ways you find yourself responding to both your heroes' style and people you didn't think you would take inspiration from?
Well, if I may start, is everybody knows I have a double career as a composer, which is my first love, I think, because it's a creative arts. It's nothing to compare with being a creative artist and a performing artist. Although a performing artist can also be creative, but there is a difference. I can tell you there is a difference. But I have conducted so many pieces, so many pieces on a yearly basis, hundreds and hundreds of pieces times 40. So you end up conducting thousands and thousands of pieces. And sometimes you have a score of a well-known or unknown composer that you conduct, and you say, oh my God, I wish I could have written this piece. Yeah. And it happened to me, of course, there were the great composers. Of course, I wanted to be able to write music like Mahler and Beethoven, who's my hero, and Shostakovich and Stravinsky and Bernstein. Oh my God, I love him so much. And in the world of film music, I love Morricone and John Williams. But it's much more than that. A couple of years ago, I conducted a piece called Javelin by Michael Torke. And I didn't know the music by Michael Torke. And I saw the score on the first rehearsal. I said, oh my God, this is so great. And this influenced me because I saw for the first time figures, a composition technique that I've never seen before. And I called him and we became kind of friends now. So I called him and I said, listen, I'm going to promote your music because I really love it. Can you send me more of your music? And he did. So I discovered his music and unconsciously I was influenced by it. And this is a very difficult topic in my career is on the one hand, I have to study so many scores that actually you all put those scores on your hard disks. It stays in your mind, it stays in your memory. While when you compose, you have to empty your computer, you have to empty your hard disk and try to be as neutral and as organic and spontaneous as possible. So sometimes it happens that I'm in a certain mood. I start writing. Because with me, everything starts with the subject and with the emotional approach to the subject. So I also think improvisation in music composition is very important. How you get to your first bar, and then of course it's the craftsmanship. But how to transmit your feelings towards the idea you have in mind. And this I discovered that is very hard to erase all this great music. But on a daily basis, I discover new things. But I had the same feeling with Philip Glass, Michael Nyman. I love the minimalists, Steve Reich. I really love this music so much, and I can say that I'm absolutely influenced by the minimalistic technique of writing. I discovered that in my pieces recently. There is a lot of minimalism, so I just cannot ignore it. But you have, as we just said before, we live in a world where there is so much music and there is so much interesting music, and it's or we listen to all this music and try and try to detect new things, and probably by some pieces we are inspired, some composers, some new things inspired you. To be honest, when I heard Nathan's piece half an hour ago, I said, wow, this is great. This is absolutely great. It's so fresh, and it's not contemporary. But to my ears, it's new. And I said, wow, this is great. And when the way you talked about it, it's really, really very fresh. It came very fresh to my mind. And I think as long as we are open to discover new things, and it's a developing process. It's a working process that never ends. The day we stop and we say, okay, this is my language, and here it stops, then it becomes boring. So every new piece should have something new that you cannot hear in one's previous work.
Yeah, you just reminded me one time, I wrote a sextet while studying with Stephen Stuckey. And he said, it's a nice piece, although I think you're just stuck in a Michael Torkey phase for the moment, but give it a couple months and you'll move on to something else.
You see.
So that's probably the memory that's sitting in the back of my head when I'm asking this question. It's like, you're just imitating somebody that you thought you liked for a second, but you'll get over it and you'll move on to
Yeah.
a new pasture.
Yeah.
But Nathan, so have you had one of these experiences? Has one of your teachers told you, you're just in a Hindemith mode, but you'll pull through?
Yeah, for like 4 years of my career. There was a very long period in which I just sounded like Philip Glass. And every single teacher told me it was a phase, and they were all wrong. Like it would be really funny because
you're really committed to him, dude.
yeah. All of my I'll be honest, it's even like an ongoing joke with a lot of my friends. Part of it was because I don't know that Philip Glass has gotten the credit he's due in certain academic circles. And so I've gotten a crap from various composition teachers, and he's often like belittled in front of me, despite me going like, "Yeah, this guy, love this guy," and then they're like, he's just a jazz guy that became a classical guy that became a rock guy, that was a literal statement said to me, which is ridiculous because he went to Peabody when he was 15. Sorry, that one just always gets me.
Studied with Nadia Boulanger too, didn't he?
Yeah, and he also studied with Ravi Shankar. That was like one of the big things. Sorry, that was just like where did you get this historical idea from, please? But anyways, and a lot of times it's just because I don't know why people don't like him so much. But because of that, as you can probably tell, I became very aggressive in like the total opposite way, which is like I love Philip Glass and I will not hide it one bit. And yeah, so I used to sound like him a lot, and that was for a good point of time, and it was that one was really important to me though because I really loved the way that he went about his career in music. And I've read a lot of his biographies and things he's done and considered that to be like one of the instrumental things for my learning as a kid was just reading about how he created things and learning from the lectures and things. I mean, I'll be honest, I once drove like 16 hours to go to right after a final exam to go see a lecture he was giving, and then drove back with a friend and slept in the car to make it to my next final at 8 a.m. the next day. Yeah, so it's been invaluable to me. But on the other spectrum, things that I never expected, I've always had a little bit more of the penchant for being poppy, some people might say, or like I tend to ride the line of being on the very accessible side and the very not accessible side. Like I mentioned, really love Philip Glass, but I'd always say like my two favorites are Philip Glass and Helmut Lachmann. So like those are the gist of the sound worlds I typically will roll around in. And so I'm used to like this sort of soundscape or like this sort of groove-based, melody-based thing, and then out of nowhere, in like the last year or so, everything I've been writing sounds like, Josh, you had a quote about it. What was it? A French boy and
Oh yeah, yeah, like a small German boy at the end of the 19th century, staring off into Mahler's soul or something.
Yeah. Like I just feel like everything I write, and I never mean it to be. I'm like, oh, I think this melody will sound cool, and then I'll be looking at it, and I'm like, these chords will fit here, and then I'll say, well, no, what if I made the voice line do this? Oh no, and I like eventually, and then like at the very end, I'll pull away from the score, and I'll either bang some of it out on the piano or listen to it on my computer. And while I still think it sounds like me, I'm like, I kind of have an identity crisis. I'm like, am I from 19th century Germany? Like this sounds just it's a very romantic style music. And I'm kind of enjoying it because Tchaikovsky was maybe the first composer I really liked when I started writing classical music. And I have in my deepest yearning to write those Tchaikovsky moments where it's just the melody and it's I don't know, there's this Tchaikovsky, like I don't want to say jazz hands, but like it's just Tchaikovsky so Tchaikovsky in like 30 seconds of melody. And I've always wanted to figure out how he does that and sort of capture that kind of stuff. So it's exciting. I like the stuff that's happening right now. But that's where stuff has gotten the other way, which is I did not ever expect in my life to be able to say, did I steal this from Mahler?
Well, it happens to all of us eventually. Something, or Wagner just somehow managed to put their way in there. Even especially when you're running out of time to do a fringe festival, chamber opera, and you don't know what to do, and you think, the Siegfried, why not? Let's just just throw some of that in there. But so I guess we can kind of sum up with one little last topic here for ourselves, and that's about the career of a composer. Now that we're coming up to the end of our day, what do you see the landscape for composers of now and in the future, especially comparing it to how it once was? And then Nathan, you already mentioned something about like a patronage system, and there are still aspects of it, but kind of getting down to the idea that before Beethoven, you needed a prince or an emperor or a very wealthy family to take you under their wing and support all of your endeavors. And then Beethoven starts to get a little bit of a capitalist mind to it and pit people against each other to use his popularity to get the highest price, publishing grand pianos and upright pianos in people's homes, and the expansion of the middle class kind of changed what composers were able to do. Then we get into the 20th century, the university music programs expand across the United States, and a lot of composers are able to use that almost as a type of patronage system. You know, they live as tenured professors, and they're able to write whatever kind of music they want to write because they don't really need an audience. They're here, you know, in their ivory tower trying to get things done. And with the generation we have now, I wonder if there's a mixture of these two things. So I'd love to get both of your perspectives on the life you've had working as a composer, and where do you see things going, especially with how COVID is changing the nature of ensembles and collaborations?
Well, I think everything depends on what your personal goal is. If you're happy to write music in your studio that is performed in your university just one time, then and it's recorded, then some people are very happy. And in a way, I know a lot of people like this, and they're very happy because they create on a daily basis. They can communicate it within their university, their school, their youth orchestra, whatever. That's a possibility. Then other people are really concerned about the number of performances they have a day. So if you're running a theater at the West End in London or in Broadway, and you have a commission to write a musical, you better take into account what people want to hear. In order to be successful. Same thing with film. When you write for film, you don't know what you want to do. I mean, even John Williams, who's a great film composer, but they want John Williams because they know what they want to have and what the result will be. So I think every composer has a different goal and a different approach. But one thing is sure, and this is probably the same thing for all the composers on the planet. From the moment you write a piece of music and you experience that people like it, people love it, people want to perform it 1 time, 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, it not only it inspires you, but it also encourages you to continue writing. And I discovered if I want to survive as a composer, if I want to have satisfaction and response from the audience through what I do, I know exactly what is successful and what is not successful. And if you can find a balance between what you know and what you want to do and who you are, if you can find a balance between these 3 elements, I think you can become very successful as a composer in pre-cover times, in cover times, and in post-cover times. As long as you're honest as a person, as an artist, and as a human being. That's what people and audiences are looking for. They're also looking for the unique selling points. What is it what Philip Glass has? He has something magic that people love. You love it or you hate it, but it is Philip Glass, and from the very first moment you recognize it. And I think this is what I discovered that is important. And my career as a composer and the success as a composer is built on all the elements I was just showcasing.
So Nathan, where do you stand on all these issues?
Yeah, so I started doing this about 11, 12 years ago. So I've been trying to be a composer for decade plus. And when I first started, it was slow going. I didn't make any progress for like 7 years. Um, Granted, and the things I did were ridiculous at that time point, and I had a very specific mindset of what being a composer was going to be. And the reason why I was so slow going was because I had that mindset. When I got to meet, by a chance encounter, David Ludwig for a single lesson, and I'm not kidding when I said a single lesson changed the next upcoming years for me, because he gave me the suggestion to go to a music festival where you and I met. Um, and going to that music festival, I met 40 other composers, and 40 other composers who all had completely different ideas of what it meant to be a composer. And this has been a continuing tradition for me. And one of my favorite parts of going to different schools or to a music festival with composers is every single time, without fail, there are a huge number of composers who are always, and I have never in my life met a composer who is relatively similar to another composer in any personality conceivable way. They are always completely unique individuals with very strong points of view and very peculiar tastes and beliefs and thoughts on what it means to be a composer. And it's one of the most beautiful diversities and exciting things that I've found when in being a composer so thus far. Um, and so when thinking about like my career as a composer and um, where it will go and how that relates to an audience in particular, um, it's hard to really say anything. As I said, I think the audience is important. I think, if you're not being a teaching composer, you have to make your money off of writing for an audience. And so if you write something that doesn't do commercially successfully, you either need to find a way to make it a commercial success or write something different. And you have to be able to have commercial skills in order to make that differentiation. But once again, all this is kind of not as important when you're at the point where you don't know whether either is. You just need to start doing things. And I think that's kind of the most important thing is I just want to do things. I don't really care if it makes me a cooler looking person successfully or a cooler looking person financially. If I can make enough to make ends meet, then that's all I really want. And I'll do as much as I can and just try and learn as much as I can on the way. And I will have to bring in one last Philip Glass quote to sort of round things off. In the time when I drove 16 hours to go see him, they did a lining question thing. And so I lined up to ask him a question, and I was the last person who got to ask one with bagged eyes and a crazed look in my face. I went up to the microphone and I asked basically this question of what I saw with the problem with contemporary music, which is I had a lot of new art friends and a lot of new theater friends and a lot of new dance friends. And when we'd hang out, we'd go to an art show and then we'd go to maybe a theater show, but not once did we ever go to a new music show after any of these events. We always went to somewhere outside of the new music art world. And so I asked him about that. I asked him about that problem. And he said that he actually saw something really similar when he first started out. And his answer, in short, was find your audience. If you have something to say, find them and say it to them. So that's why I think learning about what an audience wants is important, but it's also important to have what you want to say, not compromise it, and find who that's valuable for. Because it's, not all art is meant for everyone. Not all art is meant for, the individual specifically. There might be somebody out there who really, really needs to hear your message. And maybe you have a small niche group of people who need to hear your message, but they want to hear it, and that's important. So if you're a young composer doing a career, I think it's important to remember what you have to say and just have fun and do as much as you can until you find your place in it.
Wow, these are wise words. And there's nothing I can add to that, except probably that I have the impression that when it comes to having a composer in residence for the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia, we have the right person on the right place. And I'm really looking forward to have more chats with you, to meet you again, and looking forward to the work you are or will be composing for us. From my heart, you have an audience.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet.
Absolutely. I am very much looking forward to your premiere that we've got cooking, especially you shared a little bit of it with me yesterday to pair with our Eroica Symphony, and it is hot. So I guess we'll bring ourselves up into a wrap here. Thank you both for joining us for this musical JewelBox. We look forward to our next musical JewelBox coming up on November 8th, where we bring back the violinist Francisco Fuyana, and Thanksgiving and turkeys, and looking forward to closing out the year as cheerily as we can. Of course, this is the point in the broadcast where I have to remind everyone that you can support composers too, directly, just by giving a couple dollars. And you can go to chamberorchestra.org, hit the donate button, put in, what did I say, $16,000 last time, put in like $4 million. Make sure you call the bank first or they'll think it's suspicious. And then we could have composer in residences every month. I mean, we could have little parties. Oh, it'd be so fun. And wouldn't that make you feel good? It'd make Beethoven feel good too, even from the grave. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for supporting us. And we look forward to seeing you next time.